in healthcare design, or was there a certain moment that impacted your life that got into it, or just how did you get into healthcare design pretty much?
I'll speak to that. It really had to do with a circumstance, which was the COVID-19 pandemic, and the fact that I personally knew physicians and I wanted them to be safe. And so applying what skills that I could apply to be able to solve those problems, that's how I got involved.
Yeah, I mean, for me now, I never thought about being in healthcare design development, whatever, but I've always been interested in designing things and being creative. And as I've gotten, when we first started our business, we wanted to be in healthcare, but it was hard to find work. So we started doing other things like speakers, amplifiers, whatever. But as business developed, I mean, medical is just such a crazy, interesting industry. I mean, the problems to solve they're just crazy problems to solve. And they're super fun to work on in labs and in a science manufacturing environment and even industrial design or whatever, any aspect of it are just really interesting. And then you get to see the impact. I mean, it's not as visual as like seeing a product on a boat go down the road, but you know, you go to the hospital and you see the patients using the products and stuff, and it's super important. So.
Christy, if you'd like to.
Sure. For me, I at first thought I did not want to do medical things in college, which is why I avoided like biomedical engineering because it kind of freaked me out, honestly. But a couple years after I graduated, I had a daughter who was born with a lot of really serious medical problems. So I was in the hospital with her a lot, having to basically learn to become a nurse practically and use all this medical equipment to take care of her, both in the hospital and then at home. And that experience was just really eye-opening for me at how poorly designed a lot of medical products are compared to like the level of design that you see in other consumer products. Like a lot of it was not user-friendly, a lot of it was very ugly. And that it made me really discouraged because I thought, oh, these are products that people actually have to use. They don't have a choice. And the options are terrible in a lot of times. So that's really why I decided I wanted to become a designer and work in the medical industry, is to kind of bring more of a design perspective rather than purely an engineering driven perspective into medical products.
Okay. In your opinion, how is healthcare design different than any like other fields in design?
I can start now. I mean, it's definitely very different than other fields of design. You know, Chrissy touched on something important, that a lot of the medical devices aren't really nice looking and stuff. When we develop devices, we'll spend 2 to 3 months on industrial design and concept and stuff, and then we'll spend 4 to 5 years engineering and getting the device ready for market. So there's definitely an offset of the time and energy spent on making the device look nice versus making the device function. And the regulatory components of medical devices are extremely rigid. And so, you know, like I always say, like I like to say, you need a great idea to make a great design, but you need a great process to make a great device. Because a medical device just isn't about design, it's about the process of how you get through all those regulatory hurdles and all the testing and material selections and all those other things. So it's definitely, I mean, that is for me, the way I view it, that those are huge differences in consumer versus medical device development. So.
I would follow it. I feel like they have a lot more experience in this particular industry.
Okay. If you'd like to add something, it's Christy.
Really similar to what the others were saying, I think the medical device development process is longer because of the regulation, or maybe you need to do clinical testing. So like the device that I've been working on it for 4 years and it's still not delivered to customers yet. So I think you have to have kind of a lot of persistence and patience and willingness to learn about a lot of different things. Like I've had to learn a lot about the FDA or about requirements traceability, all these concepts that you didn't learn in design school, but that are really critical to the product development process for medical devices.
And I guess kind of going with that, like how much collaboration do you guys use with like other healthcare professionals? Like, is it pretty much an ongoing process? You guys talk back and forth with your designs and everything, or how much are they contributing to the design?
For the product that I did, working alongside the surgeons was integral to every single step of the design process, having their insight to how it was used, being able to use their in-office experiences to test different versions of the product, to just from simply finding the day in the life of the product. It was absolutely essential stuff that I would not think of as an industrial designer, just because I truly don't understand all of what they do and all of what they have to think of, and the different stakeholders involved in their industry. So very, very important.
I mean, I can say this for sure, like when we have industrial designers come to our firm, they're asked to do a lot more than industrial design. So like if somebody, I know that there's some basic principles of manufacturing and stuff taught in college and classes, but when they come to our office, you know, they'll draw something up and, you know, they take into account maybe draft on a plastic part or whatever, but I always tell them, look, go look at a YouTube video of an injection molding. Like understand the manufacturing process behind the manufacturing solution you think is going to be applied. Because a lot of times you can think something's going to work a certain way, but when you actually see how it's done, you realize, oh, I can't put that bolt there, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. What Haley was saying about like interacting with clinicians is super critical, because you have to see how they're actually using these devices. And I've never seen a cadaver, and I have no interest to ever see one. But like Christy, I was like, I don't know about medical devices. But I've had to see a lot of medical procedures, and it just changes your whole view on like what you think about the space they have to work within and how they have to move and stuff. And it's hard to get in there and see those things. So it's not like you can just go down to like Best Buy and look at similar products and get ideas. You know, you have to get into the hospital and you have to get permission from the patient and all those other things. So they become super important, and you want to do them as much as possible. But we work with clinicians all the time, and we do brainstorm sessions with them all the time as well.
Great. Christy, you wanna?
Was your question collaboration with physicians? I just couldn't.
Yeah, or there's any other people in healthcare?
Yeah, so we've collaborated with quite a few physicians, particularly because our company was also like conducting our own research studies, which isn't necessarily what every company would be doing, but we worked with them together to conduct studies where we were like testing and validating our devices. We also worked with physical therapists, even personal trainers. So we've collaborated with a lot of professionals and getting their feedback as we test our devices with them, but also working with them to really do the research studies that we needed to do in order to be able to show, because we're trying to get physicians to adopt a new device, right? So we have to show them that it works, and we've proven that it works when we write papers essentially and publish them in journals saying, look, we tested this on 400 people and here were our results. So we've worked closely with physicians to do those sort of projects.
So now with like kind of going back to Houston and everything, like so with Houston being a very growing field in the healthcare world, how will the healthcare design world be impacted like later on in the future?
I only see it growing. Really. I think what you were speaking to earlier, it's hard to put a finger on the needs in the healthcare community and how different products and devices can be solutions to those needs. It seems like it's always evolving and growing, and the medical center in Houston is absolutely enormous. There's just loads and loads and loads of very talented individuals in Houston working in so many different facets of this industry.
Christy, Larry.
Oh, Chrissy,
I think one thing to think about the healthcare industry in Houston is that a lot of companies do not know what industrial design is. So even though you as an industrial designer probably have a lot to offer those companies, they may not be like explicitly looking for industrial designers. So you're going to have to kind of like sell yourself and your talents to them. So that's something that I found when I got the job that I currently have. I went to a startup career fair in the Texas Medical Center Innovation Institute. And I think I visited the table of like all 30 companies that were there. Probably at least 5 of them were trying to hire someone who would be an industrial designer, but they weren't calling it an industrial designer. For example, one of them said, oh, we need a biomedical engineer because we're needing to design new packaging. So probably everyone here knows how to design packaging, but you would not find that job on Indeed or whatever because it's going to say biomedical engineer. So I think there's, while the healthcare industry in Houston is growing, and especially like the innovation in healthcare is growing, we would have to bridge that gap between industrial design and healthcare ourselves, I think, by going out there to the events and networking and kind of explaining who you are and what you can do. I don't think that they're not going to come looking for you, but you can go there and kind of try to work with them and see what you have to offer, because there's a lot of opportunities, I think, but you have to look a little deeper to find them.
yeah, actually, Christy's 100% right. Like, people don't know what industrial design is in the medical industry because they work with engineers, right? So they're like biomedical engineer, mechanical engineer, whatever. And even my clients, when we have clinicians come in and talk to us, like, I don't remember who told me this, maybe David here, who was a student at U of H, but he was like, I always tell people I'm like an architect of projects, or, you know, because people understand architecture and engineering, but they don't understand industrial design of products, right, or product engineering. Yeah, but there's a ton of opportunities, like both of them said, here in Houston, and it's growing super rapidly. And there's probably 20 different areas where an industrial designer can impact the design of a medical device that people trying to hire engineers don't realize they can do. So like when I hire a mechanical engineer, I don't want him to do like, he could do market research, or he could like look for products on the market and kind of compare them, or write a brief on like different aspects of things. But that's a great role for an industrial designer, right? Obviously concept sketching, none of my engineers know how to sketch anyway. So that's obviously a great asset. You know, writing proposals for costs, like there's all kinds of things front end that industrial designers can add value to that people in the medical industry might not necessarily know. But like Christy said, if you can sell those aspects, you can really kind of get your foot in the door, I think.
Can I add something?
Yeah, definitely.
100% agree. I also say your skills as industrial designers, understanding materials and manufacturing processes, and how that applies to making products. The restraints within each, putting pros and cons to what material, what process do you need to use, how is it made, how quickly could that be made. Those are skills that are also very useful in industrial design.
I guess in a way, like following that question, as a student and like all these students here, like what advice would you like give them if they would like to pursue like career in the healthcare design world?
I mean, the thing I would say is don't expect you're gonna go work in the medical industry and you're gonna get your name on a patent and then royalties for the rest of your life. Like it's a different industry, right? I mean, our company is listed on 19 or 20 patents, but we don't get royalties for anything. Like we're listed as inventors, we sign off our right to any money when we get paid hourly to do the work. You know, a lot of it's utility patents. We don't do a lot of design patents. I think only one of our patents is a design patent. So, you know, when you get into the medical field as an industrial designer, your employers are going to expect you to do more than industrial design. They're going to expect you to understand how manufacturing actually works and go to manufacturing facilities and go to the hospitals and interact with the clinicians and do kind of a cross between the engineering role and the industrial design role. But if you can bridge that gap, you can be more valuable than an engineer, because I mean, there are engineers that have to do the calculus and sit in the corner and like do the flow studies and all that. But most of the mechanical engineers that lack the industrial design skills, there's gaps that have to be filled there. And so if a company doesn't have an industrial designer, they're going to miss out on that. So I think there's a lot of things that industrial designers can offer, but they have to be super flexible in that. Like my role isn't just sketching or concepting or researching or putting together. You guys have names for the diagrams, but the diagrams on why we should use certain products or where they fall on that graph. But you know, like getting out and seeing how things are actually built and made and used through the course of the 4 years of development, not just the development. So you have to be very patient.
Haley or Christy?
Yeah, just to, I guess, amplify what Christy was saying earlier, 100% advocate for yourself and your abilities. They're more valuable than you think. They're more useful than you think. And a lot of people in different industries just don't know that you are actually the solution to what they're looking for. And so being able to say like, hey, these are ideas, these are potential solutions. Let me break it down for you. Let me show you my process of how that might work. And they can say, oh my gosh, you're right. You are the person that I was looking for. I would say that as well. Another thing I found in the process of working on that product, an important stakeholder in the process of medical products is the individuals that sell them to physicians from medical device companies. So taking them to surgeons, showing them, I feel like those would be important people to understand their jobs, their process of thinking when wanting to develop devices, develop products for that field. We could probably speak more to that.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, the medical industry is just an interesting industry, right? And there's a lot to know about it. All you can do is get into it and then kind of, you know, go with the tide and adjust accordingly. But I mean, I just keep repeating, like, flexibility is the key, you know. When we work with industrial designers, they give us concepts. I mean, immediately the engineers are like, this will never work, like you can't do whatever. So I love to just take the ideas back and go, look, I don't know about this, but can you sketch up this instead? Like, I don't like the engineers to take it and then redesign it. I like to take the engineer's ideas for the change and then bring it back to the designer and say, can you resketch this up in a different way? Because I can get much faster response for the client too, right? If the engineer gets it and starts putting it in CAD, I'm going to be like 6 weeks before I have something to show the client. But if I can get the industrial designer to just go back and make some quick changes and adjust things here and there, then I can show that to the client right away. But I mean, I probably, like, I didn't even know what industrial design was probably till like 2010, right? And then I hired an industrial designer and then he taught me what industrial design was. I mean, I heard the phrase, but I wasn't really familiar with it. But the more I get to know about it, the more I realize that a flexible industrial designer who's interested in like long-term device development and the local process is super, super valuable to an organization designing medical devices.
Christy, I don't know, want to add something?
Is the question about advice for students?
Yes.
Okay. I think my biggest advice would be to position yourself well for medical jobs. So the way that would be, I think, is by doing a project that relates to healthcare and putting that in your portfolio. I think it's really important to try to tailor your portfolio to the job you want. And even I have a specific example of that. My classmate, when I graduated, Matilda, she and I had done this one medical project that was in her portfolio, that later now she got a job at like a medical software company as a UX designer in Europe, because she's from Europe. But they even said to her like, oh, we saw that project in your portfolio, like you must be interested in medical things, even though, you know, obviously she was interested because she applied for their job, but that seeing that project in her portfolio was important to her getting that job. So I think that's one piece of advice. The other one, I know I said before to network, but I wanted to share kind of more specific ways of how you could do that for medical projects specifically. One is, I think, by trying to connect with maybe like people that you know that might be working on something in the medical area that you could collaborate with. So at one point, I think I like posted on Instagram a project that I had done in George's CAD class. And one of my classmates from back in the day contacted me, and he's a doctor, and he said, oh, can you help me? I'm trying to develop this device. So that led to me working with him, and our device, I think we submitted it for a patent at Baylor, just because I posted like my iron on Instagram. I got to work with the doctor and work on, like, we tested our eye surgery tools and sheep eyes. It was a lot of fun. So that's one way, like connecting with people that someone I already knew. Another way is you could look at U of H, like search on the website, find other professors who are maybe in bioengineering or other areas, and see if they have projects that you could work with them on, like for the summer or something like that. At one point I contacted somebody and they did say that I could work with them. It ended up not working out from my end, but they were totally open to it. Another weird thing that happened, one of my friends, Kim, who graduated from here a while ago, she would rock climb a lot at the U of H, and she met like a professor from Rice that way who was working on a medical device. I think he saw her prototype. Her junior project was like a rock climbing tool. So she was photographing it there at the rock wall, and he's like, oh, you made that? Come help me, I'm making something. So again, she was sharing her work, you know, and somebody recruited her, and that ended up being her internship for like graduation, was developing that medical device with that Rice professor. So these are maybe not the same as just like requesting people on LinkedIn, but really putting yourself out there, trying to find connections of other people who are working on medical things and see how you can collaborate with them, even as a side project, or like a summer thing could lead to something more.
Well, and to add to Christy's point, I don't think like Rice doesn't have an industrial design program.
Right.
And some of the other universities don't really focus on it, right? But they have these capstone projects that they do every year. And a lot of the engineers work on biomedical projects. And the universities have to do something with those projects after they're done with them. Yeah, kind of going back a little bit, but touching upon what she said about networking, Houston's like medical community is growing super fast. And I don't know if anybody follows TMC, the Texas Medical Center, or TMCX, which is the Innovation Center, but they're building TMC3, which is a massive like biomedical complex just south of the Med Center, kind of between the stadium and the Med Center. And it's like a $3 billion development project or something. It's gonna have a hotel, they're gonna have like 1 million square feet of lab space, they're moving in all these like medical device companies and stuff. So it's like unlimited opportunity for a job in this area, right? It's like, it's huge. You can get, and maybe if I connect with you guys later or something, we could probably arrange like a tour for some students to go down to like MIDI, which is the Houston Methodist Research Center for Device Translation. They have like a 500,000 square foot research facility there. And you know, they'll take you through the facility and show you how they do device translation there. They don't have any patients, like it's all either animals or cadavers or things like that, but they have huge like study rooms where like people can sit in a room and watch TVs and then watch the doctors work on projects and products, and just kind of connecting and getting in those spaces and meeting the different people that work at those institutions is a great way to connect in the Med Center here in Houston.
So if the floor is open to any questions, either here in person or in the Zoom call.
Question for us. You said that you did, like, with your projects, you do a lot of brainstorming sessions. Physicians or people or healthcare. I'm working on a project that takes a participatory research design approach with surgical trainees. I'm just wondering, what does that look like, those brainstorming sessions? What are they like?
Probably not like brainstorm sessions you guys are used to, because we had an administrator designer work with us and he would set up brainstorm sessions and it was very like stuff on the wall and stuff like that. When our clinicians come in, like we have a clinician that we do sessions with like every 6 weeks. He's associate director over at Texas Children's Daily. And he just comes in and sits down and we go through several projects we're working with and we basically consult with him. And you know, he'll give us advice on like I was talking to Mark Kimbrough earlier about administrative costs, like the payers, the insurance companies that pay for these devices, why they would pay for it or wouldn't pay for it. He'll talk to us about like, I'll be like, well, this is a great device, like, or the clinician that wants it, that thinks this is a great device, whatever. And he'll be like, yeah, that's not even needed. Like, we don't even have that problem, doesn't even exist. He has that problem, but the rest of the world doesn't, you know? So of course, this one person might not have all the answers either, but that it's just kind of an open discussion like that about different things. We've done some bigger ones. We have a client of ours, they're like half our business. We've been doing business for like 15 years. They do neonatal products. And so they would put together this thing every year called Neotex, because they're in California, but their design firm is here. So they would send clinicians here and we'd meet at Marriott. There'd be like 8 or 10 people at a round table. And we would just go through product ideas and go back and forth with them. Like, you know, how much could we charge for this? And, you know, how does that be packaged and who would be likely to use it? Is a respiratory clinician or is it a nurse or a doctor? So that's our brainstorm sessions with clinicians typically go like that.
How much involvement in the design?
Very little, right? I mean, ultimately it impacts the design, right? But we're not like sketching in front of them.
Any other questions?
How does the user testing process look like?
For the valve example, so it actually went through various different fidelities of prototypes, from something very basic, but mostly it was getting it to the surgeons themselves, either them taking it away, taking to their offices, and then me having to follow up with questions and get feedback, or me going there myself and say, like, can I watch it? Like, can I just be a fly on the wall and see what happens? Taking notes of the day in the life of the product was probably one of the most useful things. And I would say in equal measure, it was getting back different fidelities of prototypes and seeing, you know, like the surgeons giving me feedback of being like, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And that was our user research.
I don't know if Christy wanted to add something.
It's pretty similar. I mean, in my case, the devices that we're working with are not used by surgeons. We have 2 versions. One is actually used by individuals themselves. So it's like a device that you could own at home. So that one, we can have anybody test it. So we have had, you know, friends and neighbors test it or family members. Then the clinical version, similar to what you're saying, we sometimes either lend it to somebody for them to test it and give us feedback, or one of us will be there watching while they use it in the clinic and getting feedback from them, but also from the patients. Or we have like some pilots. That means that we have a healthcare group who's piloting our product to see if they want to like implement it into their general use. So they have it. We're not there with them. I think one of us went there to help them set it up, but they've been testing it for many months and then letting us know their feedback over time.
And real quick, yeah, to both Christy and Haley's point, you're gonna get more design feedback in that environment than just sitting at a table with a clinician, like brainstorming thoughts on products. But it also depends what kind of device it is. There's multiple classifications of medical devices, class 1, 2, and 3, class 1 being the least regulated. So with a class 1 device, there's almost no regulation. They call it self-regulating. You basically have to make sure the product is safe. Like you're obligated to do that, but even the FDA won't come in and audit your design file. So unless there's some kind of an injury or some reason for them to come in and look at it, they don't. So you can just, bring it to a patient and go try this or whatever. But if it's a regulated device like a class 2 or class 3 device, there's a lot of stuff you have to go through to get it in the hospital on a patient. The hospitals have IRBs, like an internal review board. They have to approve the product for use if it's not on the market. A lot of internal review boards won't approve it unless it's already for sale. So this like adds to the length of getting something to market, right? So yeah, as you get into higher classification of devices, it's more difficult to get that feedback you need. And a lot of times, like I think you might have been talking about, is if you just ask them, like you send them a survey or give them the device and leave, it's really hard to get the answers. Like they'll fill out a form, whatever, but then you're like, wait, what does that mean? You couldn't use it? Like, did you try to use it? Did you plug it in? Whatever. So the interaction is super important if you have that opportunity.
Yeah, I found things like directing questions of like, can you tell me where the product is stored when we go to use the product? What is that process called? Who does that process? What would you say are first, second, third steps that you do? Just really specific little moments, and a lot of times it led to further questions, and they'd say, actually, you know what, when that happened, this other thing happened. And you go, oh, that's very insightful. Tell me more about that. That was my experience.
Okay, I guess we have time for a couple more questions. Okay, yeah. Two more questions. Okay.
Miles' question. Kristen touched on it, but Miles asked, how do regulations differ for US versus international designs?
Yeah, regulations. Do you want to talk about that, Kristen?
Sure. I was going to talk about the regulations a little bit because I see Mariana also asked another question in the chat. So one thing to know about the FDA and the regulations is that they're not dictating any designs. So Mariana asked, like, is the FDA the reason that the vaginal speculum has remained unchanged? And no, it's not at all. The reason that some medical designs that like aren't that great stick around is because basically nobody has bothered to make and market and sell something better, because the FDA doesn't tell you how something has to be designed. Basically, it's telling you a bunch of kind of steps and rules that you need to follow in your design process to make sure that the device is safe. And so if you do have to submit something to the FDA, it's basically going to be a packet of paperwork documenting everything that you did to ensure that your device was safe, but they're never going to tell you like, this is what your design should be shaped like or what it should be. So even in terms of international regulations, maybe in another country, like what's considered a class 1 device in the US might be considered a class 2 device in Europe, which might mean that you had to do different paperwork to prove that your device is safe. And I'm not like, the paperwork involves steps like we did this risk management assessment, we did this testing, but the regulations really don't dictate like the specifics of your design. That's still up to you. It's really about the procedures that you need to take to ensure safety of your devices and the documentation that you have to provide, if that makes sense. So from one country to another, those things will be different because like in Canada, the FDA has no jurisdiction over Canada. They have something else. So if we want to sell our device in Canada, we need to register with the Canadian equivalent of the FDA and then check their regulations and make sure that we're following all of those, if that makes sense.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that a little bit. So they will though tell you that it has to meet certain ISO and international standards, like for testing. So as far as like the design of the product itself, as long as it meets those standards, they really have no input on it, right? But those standards change between countries. So, and like Christy said, you can have a class 1 device here that's a class 2 device in Europe. And some countries don't even have like regulatory bodies, so they just default to like the European Union or something like that. And this year, like Europe regulations got way more complex. They're releasing this new medical device requirement. It's called the MDR, but they're releasing this new MDR. And like almost every device now has to go with a tech file. So for class 1 in the US, you don't need to self-regulate and you don't need documents. But for class 1 in Europe, you have to do a tech file, which is like basically a design control file that you need for a class 2 device here. So it's a lot of paperwork. We submitted just for breathing cannula, oxygen cannula. We submitted for a 510K for, well, it's an oxygen cannula. We're submitting it for CPAP, which is essentially the same use for the device, but on a machine. And the 510K was like 900 pages. And there's over like 16 tests we have, like mechanical tests we have to do. So.
Okay, I guess one more question.
Yeah, I have a question and maybe Christy, you know, I know more of your journey, so I'll direct it to you. You've kind of been in the in the ground level of being an entrepreneur, starting a company, seeing it from the very beginning while balancing design at the same time. Can you speak a little bit to that, your experience to that, and really, you know, if you guys have anything to add as well?
Yeah, so in the company I work for, I am not the like original founder of the company. So I wasn't the original one that came up with the idea, but the 2 co-founders, one of them continued as the CEO, and she really does care a lot about design. So originally I got hired at the company as an engineer, and I was doing some like 3D printing and soldering sort of stuff. But since she saw that I also knew design, she thought, oh, like, hey, help us figure out what our final product should look like. Help us design our app, help us design our website, help us design our logo. And so I was able to kind of get in at a good time in order to really shape a lot of the design aspects of the company. But that just because I happened to join so early and with a CEO who really saw the value in design, because I think especially for startups, you know, a lot of it, you need to make yourself look good and look really professional to investors or to people that you want to partner with. So I think design has a lot of value at the very beginning of any startup in terms of kind of adding credibility. And then thankfully, since we value design, we've also been really heavily user focused and trying to make our products something that users really want to use, because especially since our target market is older adults, I'm sure everyone can think of an example of like a very ugly kind of like stereotypical product for older adults that's really like stigmatizing, and most people would not want to use it, including older adults. Like a lot of older adults I know like to use Apple Watches versus like a fall alert button, for example. So I think that in our case, design has brought a lot of value because we're kind of looking at the older market differently in terms of thinking like, no, good design is for everyone. We do not need to design something like stereotypical old looking in order to sell our product to older adults. I hope that answered your question. You can follow up with me later. If you have more.
That's great, thank you.
Well, I mean, I can tell you this, like, industrial design is probably one of the best places to start if you want to like get a degree and go start a business, because it's such a unique field where, like, if I hire an industrial designer, he's just going to do concepting. He's not going to do his research. He's got to do other things. So if we're heavy on engineers and we have industrial design work, we contract it out. It's just easier that way, right? So there's a lot of opportunity for like contract industrial design work if you're interested in like doing business. But don't confuse design with running a business, because like just yesterday I got another letter from my accountant and I'm like, wait, what? That's a law? So it's like business is you plan on working a lot if you plan on running a business. To speak to Christy's point, the one thing I want to say is, like, she's talking about like the stereotypical products for for like older people and stuff. You know, it just made me think like a great place for industrial designers in Houston is the children's area, like children's pediatrics. One of the funniest projects we've ever done is like they wanted like a hook that went in the incubator that held like a tube, and one of our designers like turned it into an animal, and it created this whole like theme. It was like, maybe we can have like a gorilla, maybe we can have a giraffe, and maybe we can have, and then we had this brainstorm thing at the Marriott, and all the clinicians were like, this is awesome. What else can we bring color and character and stuff to the NIC unit and the PED units? Because you go into these hospitals and they're like super stale. And I know Texas Children's has all the colorful lights and stuff, and they're dressing it up more, but the devices themselves are really boring and stale. And I mean, for adults, nobody really cares. Like, you just want to get out of the hospital safe. But it really psychologically impacts the children to go into a place where everything is like that. And so if it, I mean, none of the engineers that work for me would have come up with like an animal idea, right? If industrial designers have the ability to bring those like creative, colorful ideas to the hospitals, I mean, that's a huge thing, I think. And I think it's lacking right now.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Christy, Haley, and Larry for coming and joining us and talking about your experience here. And also thanking Sidsa for making this. I also helped, but it's a part of it. But thank you so much for joining. We will be having another panel at 1 for our tech panels. That would be great. Please come get your lunch. Come back. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for coming.
Okay.
Yeah, if you guys could just stick around for a couple minutes, we're gonna take a nice group photo of everyone.
Okay.
We're gonna put the table.
Sure.
You guys have a good night. Yes.
Yes.
You guys are gonna have to lay on the
Yeah, I would love that. Take that.
It's okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Sorry I couldn't come.
Oh, I mean, you're doing amazing work right now with your PhD, so
Thank you.
cool. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. So we'll be back at 1 o'clock for our next panel. Okay, cool. All right, I'm gonna call. Bye, Christy. Thank you so much again.
You're welcome.